All right, good morning, everybody. Hey, glad to have everyone get on here. I was a little worried at 1 minute two. It was just Jason and I on here, and I was like, uh-oh. So anyway, glad you're on here. Before we get started, any questions that you want to ask that are compliance related, and we can talk about them before I jump into what I was planning to talk about. All right. I will take that as a no. So cool. Well, awesome. So, what I thought I would talk about today is I spent yesterday about probably 2.5 hours on a phone call with an agent within our company and an attorney that is representing us because of a lawsuit that's happening within the company. And what we were doing is we spent the 2.5 hours going through talking about questions that the attorney for the other side of this lawsuit had in preparation for doing now I lost the term.
Deposition.
Yes, thank you. The depositions. So, thanks, Jason. So, in preparation for these depositions, and so the other attorneys sent over a bunch of these questions that we had to then go through and answer the questions for them, so that they then, when we do the deposition, can know what questions they are going to ask. And just to give you a little bit of background on the scenario, and I'm going to try to do this in a way that is very cryptid, so that you don't know who it is or where the property was, anything that way, or even hopefully specifics of what it's about, just because it could be embarrassing for the agent and or just want to protect the privacy and those type of things. But so what happened is the background on this, why we're in this lawsuit is, and what I thought would be good to talk about is, so the sellers of a property put together their seller disclosures. They then sent the seller disclosures. Sorry, I don't know if I said that right. The agent sends over to the sellers the seller disclosures. The sellers fill out the seller disclosures, but they had not lived in the property, and so they had a family member that had been at the property look at those seller disclosures before sending them off. And then what happened is the family member wrote back and said, "Hey, what about da 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 da," and listed out a few different things uh, concerning the property. And when they sent that back, they sent it back to the seller along with to our agent to say, "Hey, here's what about these items?" And our agent didn't really get involved in any of that. The seller just replied and to the buyer, to the family member, and to our agent, and just said, "Yeah, I don't think those things are relevant to anything to do with the property, and it's just going to probably complicate things. So we're not going to add anything that way to the seller disclosures." Well, so they didn't, but along the way, the questions that of what this lawsuit is about, was a pretty obvious item that the listing photos showed, and the people could obviously see it when they came and looked at the property. And we talk about, and in our real estate purchase contract it says that we will disclose any of the things that wouldn't be discoverable by a reasonable buyer doing a reasonable home inspection. And so our agent felt like really there's not really much to say, because if you look at the property, you can see what the family member was referring to. Sorry, I'm trying to make sure I'm being very cryptic on this so that it don't give anything away. But the buyer then go ahead and purchases the home, moves in, and then decides that they're going to go do some renovations on the property. And then in the process of that, find some issues with the property. And they then find out, I guess this other family member maybe had done some checking into this property, but the seller wasn't aware of that, and the agent definitely wasn't aware of it, and so that's why we're now in this lawsuit. Okay, so that's kind of the background, and the reason why I thought it would be helpful to talk about this is I'm just going to go through and give you an idea of some of the questions that the agent was then having to answer to for this particular lawsuit. And the idea, I guess, what I'm wanting you to think about is, as you are out listing property and you're working with sellers on their seller disclosures, I just want to make sure that you are mindful and remembering that really the way that I always like to train this is when you're doing your seller disclosures and the seller asks you a question, should we disclose? Or in this particular scenario, a family member came along and said, hey, what about disclosing X? And my answer to that always is, well, in fact, let's make it even more relevant, because here's where it usually comes up is you get a property under contract, a buyer does a home inspection. After their inspection, they then send over to your seller saying, here's the items we want repaired, and here's a copy of the home inspection so that you can see what items need to be repaired. And a lot of times, what happens is then if the seller says, we're not going to do those repairs, and the buyer were to then cancel, the question that then comes up from agents quite often is, do we need to now disclose anything that was in that home inspection? And we had actually one time, and I think I talked about it on one of these calls in the past. We had one time that the agent even said, well, they sent it over, but I didn't open it. And what should I do? Should I forward it to the seller? And what if I forward it to the seller, but then they don't open it and look at it? That way they're not responsible to disclose. And part of what came up yesterday over and over again is, was the agent aware, or should they have been aware? And so I think to some extent with those inspection items that come over, in the scenario of saying, well, we're just not going to open our home inspection and look at it, therefore we're not responsible, is not probably going to work, because that would fall under the, were you aware, or could you or should you have been aware of this potential issue? And so my recommendation to you is, in that scenario, is if there are items that the seller disagrees with, and that's usually where the question comes up, is the buyer's home inspector says, hey, there's this issue, and the seller says, no, that's not a problem, we've never had an issue with it, is the recommendation would be then have the seller get a professional to come out for whatever the issue is and get another opinion. And if that person still says, no, there's no problem, then you're probably going to be okay with that. But I would still disclose it and send over, hey, the seller had a professional come out, this is what they said. And especially because home inspectors typically are not specialists in all things. They are general, going out and looking at things, and getting an electrician to come out and look at something electrical is going to be better than just a home inspector saying, I don't like this or that. So I have just found, and I believe that if what you do is disclose the information that's been given, but then here's what my seller did to find out that it's not a problem, or that it was, and then they therefore then fixed it. But making sure that you're disclosing any of those things is going to be for your protection. So anyway, so I just thought I would go through a few of the questions, and then we'll see what questions and things you guys have on it. But one of the questions that our agent was asked, in fact, it was the very first one, was, describe your role in preparing, reviewing, or signing the seller's property condition disclosures for the property sold to the plaintiff. Now, so hopefully everyone here is aware, you do not prepare the seller disclosures. The seller needs to be the one that does that. Even if it's some little old lady that needs some help, she needs to get a family member, a neighbor, somebody besides you to help in filling that out. But then part of that question was reviewing. So we should, and the Division of Real Estate, with you being a licensed real estate agent, has said that your job is to review those seller disclosures and to make sure that the seller went through and answered every one of those questions, either with a yes, no, or an NA. And that if there was something you are aware of, that you make sure that the seller is aware that they need to disclose those. So that was the first question: is what was your role in preparing, reviewing, or signing the seller property condition disclosures? Which again, should not be preparing them. You should review them to make sure that they are filled out, but and that the seller had answered each question. But you shouldn't be signing or doing anything else that way. There were a number of other questions that were asked, so and not relevant to every scenario, but I'll tie it. One of them was they wanted the agent to state whether they had reviewed or were aware of a report that was done, whether that was a home inspection or some other type of report. And so if you had received a previous home inspection report, it would be very likely, if you ended up in court, that an attorney on the other side is going to be saying, state whether you are aware of this other buyer's inspection, and what did you do with it, and how did you become aware of it, and those type of questions. Okay, so that's again where it would be important, if you were sent over this other inspection report, that yeah, we probably should share that, for not should we 100%, you should share it with the seller, but then from there, amend the seller disclosures based on the information and answer questions about it. Okay. Next question that the agent got asked was to identify any documents or reports that were in their possession or control at the time, that the at any time, that relate to the condition, safety, or marketability of the property. So again, give us any, and also with that is give us a copy of those reports, is what they want as well. So first you have to identify, were you given any type of reports? So again, hopefully the point I'm driving home is anything that you can get that way, it's always going to be in the seller's best interest to disclose those things. Okay. Another question, and I'm skipping through some of the ones that maybe are relevant only to that specific case and maybe wouldn't be always involved in them. But next one would be identify all persons with whom you discussed how to complete the disclosures, including realtors, contractors, or family members. So you're going to have to answer to anybody that you had discussions with that way. And then another question that was related to that one was to identify anybody that you talked to about it within the brokerage. So if you went to another agent in the office, you came to me or Jason or Ruby, and you asked questions about a specific scenario on the property, they want you to disclose all of those things. So hopefully what you're seeing with this is they're just trying to figure out, what did you know, what should have you known, and what did you do with the information that you knew. And I think that's a good way of thinking about it, is what did you know, what should have you known, and then what did you do with that information that you got. Okay. And then as far as requests for documents and things, we have to give all versions of the seller property condition disclosure. So if for some reason you filled out seller disclosures and then archived them and had them fill out another one, you would have to produce both copies of that, which is great that we have those from within dotloop, because if for some reason there had been another one out there and then it disappeared, that could be a problem. They're asking for all communication between the seller regarding the condition of the property. So any emails or text messages that would have gone back and forth, and to give copies of all emails, text messages between you and any real estate agent or brokers regarding the condition of the property. All communications between, oh, I already talked about that. Communications between you and Century 21 or any other agent or employee of Century 21. And then any notes or messages regarding how to answer the seller property condition disclosures. So if for some reason the seller asked you a question about filling out the disclosures, you would need to produce that as well. So anyway, I just thought it'd be interesting to share with you some of those things that in the event that you ended up in a lawsuit, or if there's an issue, those are the type of things that you're going to be asked is, again, what information did you know or should have you known or could have known? And then once you got that information, what did you do with that information? Who did you share it with? Who did you discuss with it? And how did you decide? Now, they also then went through and asked questions of me, which is related to basically what training do we do regarding seller's disclosures and how to fill them out and what information should be shared or not shared and all of those kinds of things. And I have to share with them any videos that we have done. So every time that we have talked about seller disclosures on one of these compliance calls, any of the mandatory residential where we talk about seller disclosures, or in the 12-hour new agent class that we do it and we talk about seller disclosures, I have to provide that because what they're looking for is negligence. Did we not do our duty in training it? So part of why we're talking about this today is to give us more ammunition, even if we needed it down the road, that, hey, as the brokerage, we have trained our agents about it. We've talked to them about it and done our part to help you guys understand. So anyway, just want to make sure you guys understand the importance of anytime really a seller says to you, should I disclose? The answer is yes. But like whatever it is, and part of why you need to make sure that you're saying yes, even if it does seem like maybe it's kind of something dumb, is in the event that it turns into something that's not dumb or a big deal, what's going to happen is the attorney would turn it around on you and that you were asked, what should we do with this information? So just make it a habit of anytime somebody says, should I disclose? The answer is yes, because if you disclose it, it allows then not to have us end up being in a lawsuit. So when I look back on, and it's always easy to Monday morning quarterback, looking back, you can say, oh, if we would have done this, would have been awesome. But in this particular scenario, had we just sent that over to them and said, hey, we don't feel like this was a big deal, but we want to make sure you have the information and that you're aware of it, we would not be in this scenario at all right now if we had just done that. But and part of it, to the agent's credit though, is we also have an obligation to of a fiduciary duty of obedience, that if our seller says, hey, do this, we have to obey, right? And so that's what the agent's saying is, I gave the information to the seller, or when the seller got it, the seller is the one who came back and said, don't disclose that. Well, as you can see from this case right now, what I just shared with you, really, it is in your best interest to say, when that happens, to say to the seller, hey, just to make sure you don't ever end up in a lawsuit over this, my recommendation is you should be sharing this with them. And really, again, depending on what it is, your safest bet is to say, and if you don't, then I'm going to share it with them so that they are aware of the scenario. But if you'll explain it to the seller, I've found, and help them understand of, hey, all we got to do is give the information and then explain why we don't think it's that big of a deal. Or let's get somebody out there to check it out to make sure that it's not a big deal, is going to save them, because this particular lawsuit could end up costing them more than the equity that they had in the property. And so really, it's just to your safety and your seller's safety, to making sure that you are disclosing everything that you know about the property or that the seller knows about the property, to enable the buyer to make a good decision. So anyway, questions?
I have one.
Sure.
What what are they suing are they suing the agent or the homeowner or all people? And what is it they're looking to get out of the lawsuit?
Perfect. Yeah. So basically, in this scenario, that it's both the seller and the brokerage that they are suing, and what they're trying to get out of is basically, we want our money back. We don't, the property is not going to work for what we wanted to be able to do, and therefore, basically, we want out of the property and want our money back, or at least an amount that would allow them to take care of the problem and still do what they want to do with it. And the other side of that is these things like drag on. The sale of this property was 3 years ago, and so during that time, once they file the lawsuit for whatever the amount of money is, it would then start to accrue interest at 10% per year too. So these things drag out for a long, long time, which then creates that scenario that it ends up costing a lot of money.
Isn't there a statute or something that protects us over a certain amount of time? I mean, 3 years? Wow, that's
Yeah.
long.
So yes, yeah, great question, Julie. So yes, the answer to that would be yes. However, um, even though, like I'm saying, it's 3 years ago, it's been in talks and going on for longer or less than 3 years. Like it started, um, the process started. It's not like they showed up 3 years later. I guess what I'm saying is they were, once they got into the property and started to do what they wanted to do, is when they started contacting the agent, trying to do some mediation, trying to work things out. And so,
Oh, I see.
But I kind of had the same question. I'm not sure if you answered it. Isn't Utah statute 6 years to
I'm
litigate?
not, yeah, I'm not sure exactly on that. So if somebody else knows the exact answer, I'm not positive on what the statute of limitations would be on that. But typically I would say every time, all of these that I have been involved with, it comes to light long before that. It's usually within months or or so after, maybe within a year after, and then it's the process takes a while before lawsuits are filed and all that kind of stuff. Okay, any other questions? Oh, let's see. So even though the buyer could do their own inspection and discover the same items a previous inspector found, the seller's required to disclose any previous inspection items not disclosed already. Yeah, and it's a good question, Bruce. And that's the challenge on it is it boils down to when this seller filled out the seller disclosures and they got to the section at issue, they checked the box no. And so what they're making the argument is that the seller knew and didn't disclose is really what it was. So yes, what you're saying is right, is the buyer does, it is a buyer beware state, like you needed to do that. But the seller does have an obligation to disclose what they know, especially if it's a latent defect, something that wouldn't be discoverable during an inspection. But yeah, the real estate purchase contract says if it could be discovered during a reasonable inspection, then it would not necessarily need to be disclosed. But again, I think the best answer is if the seller discloses it, it forever removes the option for someone to come back on them. And I've only had one of my own real estate transactions that ended up in small claims court. And in that case, we showed up with the seller disclosures. We showed it to the judge that, hey, we did disclose there had been water in the basement. And the judge looked at it, said to the buyer, I've got your signature on this seller disclosures. The seller told you about it. So why are we here? And then they said, well, tree root branches grew into the sewer and then it backed up into the house. And he said, welcome to home ownership. That happens on my street every day or every year. So congratulations on owning a home, basically. He said it a little nicer than that, but not much. Let's see. And Rebecca's saying she looked it up and it has it depending on the type of case. So anyway, cool. Okay. Any other questions?
It was written contracts are 6 years.
Cool. So 6 years. Good to know. Which you could discover a lot of stuff in 6 years. So
I have a question
yes.
because I have a listing in Magna, and we all remember the big Magna quake, right?
Yep.
So we know about it. The seller, like, oh yeah, our house was shaking, and so I advised that he, have an engineer maybe before listing it, just do some kind of a report to make sure everything's good. Is that a good thing to do before listing a home if you kind of are aware of that and they talked about the earthquake when you're walking through the house and
I
anyway.
mean, I think it's fine I think it's fine whether they have an engineer come and look at it or not. The main thing is that they just disclose as they're filling out the seller disclosures, is that they disclose anything they know. And really what I've found works best is just telling the seller that don't be afraid to tell people, don't be afraid to check the box yes on there. Like it's not a bad thing to say yes. In fact, checking the box and saying yes and then explaining. So I think on that, if they just said, yeah, there's cracks in the foundation or the house, and there was an earthquake in this particular date and blah blah blah, because then that puts the onus on to the buyer to, hey, if you're concerned about it, then they should go in and do it. So I don't think it's bad though, Julie. I think it's fine if you wanted to do that, because then, yeah, for sure, if the sellers had somebody come out and look at it, then they can say, here's a copy of the report that we got that says it's fine. But the biggest thing is just disclosing what they know.
Gotcha.
All right. Any other questions?
Russ, I just have a comment.
Sure.
So I listed a home, it was just sold, in which it was a trustee, you know, of course, the successor trustee was the one who was selling it and didn't know about the house, hadn't lived there for more than 40 years. But I just told him to just fill out anything that they know, if he helped with anything, if they did, because I said it's okay to say, you know, that what you know, it's just going to protect you. I said, and at the bottom, it was really great because he put just a thought at the bottom that said, you know, I have not lived here for 40 years. I filled out this to the best of my knowledge, just to kind of, you know, give them what he knew about the house, but also, you know, he did not fill out anything like some people do. Well, we don't know about this because we don't live there. And so I think that that was a really good thing for him to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's great. And I would just add to that of it is amazing how stuff shows up. Whether it's a neighbor that comes over later on and is like, hey, so what did they ever do about how it floods every spring? Or what did they tell you? Did they ever get this fixed or that fixed? And you know, it's if there is something out there, it will probably show up. And if the seller hasn't disclosed it. So I think the biggest thing for us is just making sure that the sellers know, don't be afraid to disclose. And all of us, our natural inclination is going to be like, oh, have you ever had any leaks in the property? Their natural inclination is going to be like, well, it was only this one time the sink overflowed and blah 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 blah. Like, but yeah, it might not be a big deal, but yes, disclose that still. Like every little thing. And I think I've shared before of my friend that was an attorney when he was selling his house and the buyer said they weren't going to do an inspection. He filled out the seller disclosure and checked yes on anything that he possibly could think could be an issue. And his whole thought process is on that was, once the people buy the house, if they came back later on saying, oh, there was a problem with the stucco, he can say, yeah, I checked the box that said, yes, I'm aware of cracks in the stucco. Like, and so it really does, again, by the seller disclosing it, puts the buyer on notice, hey, if you're worried about it, you better check further. So it's just when the seller goes, oh, it was only this one little time that the sink overflowed, and then they don't disclose that, and then somehow the buyer goes in and finds mold somewhere that creates this big issue, is when they come back saying, hey, you didn't tell us that you had had a flood in the property. So like I almost feel like anybody that's lived in a house for any amount of time, like meaning longer probably than 5 years or something, probably has had a sink overflow, their dishwasher flooded, the washing machine, you know, something. Like at my house, we had that one time that the hose on the back wiggled out, and when the dishwasher or the washer emptied, it emptied all over the floor, which went down into the storage room. And stuff like that is like, you would generally, most people would think, well, I don't think I need to disclose that. I mean, we just cleaned it up and it was fine. But again, if for some reason there comes some issue and it could somehow be tied back to it, an attorney is going to tie it back to you knew and you didn't say anything. So anyway, I probably beat that to death.
Russ,
Yes.
our house flooded August 1st, 2021 in Enoch when that huge flood came. Governor was in front of our house like the second or third day. And that's common knowledge, right? But I disclosed that thoroughly on everything. And I even told the lady, this is where I was standing and in the basement, and this window broke and this window broke. I said it was so traumatic. I mean, I know it sounds horrible, but it was like the Titanic. The water just came in and picked up stuff that I couldn't lift at all. And I said it was horrible. I said, this room, don't put anything you treasure in there, because my dad's desk was in there, our pictures were in there. And I'll be dang if she didn't make that her 3 girls' bedroom. I'm like, are you freaking
Well, maybe she
kidding
doesn't.
me?
Maybe she doesn't care about them.
Oh
Maybe that's
man,
why she put them in there.
no.
Just kidding. I'm
She's
kidding.
a good mom. But you know, I always tell my sellers that look, our house flooded in August and we sold it in like March. People, they know things will happen, right? But you need to write it down and you need to say what you did and if you like protected it more, right?
Mhm.
Like we dug out the window wells more and we put sump pumps in there, and you know, we really tried to make it so that it wouldn't happen again, even though it was supposed to be a 600-year flood. But you know, you never know. And
Mhm.
I said, people don't care if something has happened as long as you've taken care of it. And if they're buying a house, they should have some idea that it isn't going to stay perfect forever.
Yeah,
So,
and probably hasn't been perfect forever. But yeah, that's just it. I found as long as the seller can explain what happened and what they did about it, then at that point, most of the time, like you're saying, the buyer's just fine. But if not, then they can do whatever research that they want to do to figure it out. But I would just say it's always going to be less costly to fix it in the beginning than it is going to be if they go to a lawsuit like what we're dealing with here. So cool deal. Okay.
So I
Well,
just wanted to say, it'd be good for everyone just to read what I posted, because it says property damage cases are for 3 years. So it really it varies. And so I don't want everyone just to think 6 years, but the oral contracts are different than written stuff like that. Oral contracts are 4 years. So
and
just
you,
FYI.
you're never going to go wrong by disclosing is probably the moral of the
Yeah,
story.
sure.
It's so anyway, cool deal. Okay, thank you all. Thanks for being on here. Have an awesome rest of your day and weekend, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Russ.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Russ.
Thank you.